Okay, so this is where we left off last time. We're looking at the 1300s to 1700s, but the Safavids come in the 1500s. So that's where we are, the 1500s. And we see that the Pashtuns have been consumed by the Safavids and the Mughal Empire. So there they are. They've had a run at being in charge of the Delhi Sultanate, but now the Delhi Sultanate has been taken over by the Turks, Babur, who came through Kabul, set up a kingdom in Kabul, and that was his base when he went down and conquered the last of the Delhi Sultanates, which was being run by Pashtuns at the time. So we had that irony. But now we're going to take a closer look at the Safavids and what that means, and Shiism, and let's move on. So Shiism, I'm just going to review a couple of slides from last time. It started really as a Sufi mystical movement run by Kurds. Okay, so and over time, this Sufi master, who started in the Caspian Sea around 1300, his order continued over time, and with time, the progenitor of the Safavid dynasty, his father had been a Sufi master. And so this guy's name is Saf al-Din, and his Sufi order was called Safavid order, but that's going to be the name of the dynasty that takes over. And this dynasty is going to last until 1979. The last one was the Shah of Iran in the Safavid dynasty. And we all know what happens there with Khomeini coming in. We've lived through that. So we kind of know that the Shia religion makes a big comeback, a purist Shia religion. So this is the fella, Ismail, the first Shah of the Safavid dynasty. And he was quite a guy. He started out as a Sufi in the tradition of that order, but he converted to Shiism, and the attraction for him in Shiism was the central place of Ali. And everybody honors Ali, who was related to Muhammad in two ways. I'll get to that in just a second. But he claimed that he was the reincarnation of Ali. We looked at this last time. I just wanted to reinforce it again, how much Iran and Shiism is international. It's a melt. Ismail himself was a melting pot with all these ethnicities represented in his background. And he had a famous ancestor. His pedigree was incredible. We went over this last time. I won't go over it again. But he was from near the Caspian Sea. The Azerbaijan Turks were in charge there, and so he knew how to speak Persian and Azerbaijani, no doubt, in addition to Kurdish. So very, very international, eclectic. So Shiism from the very get-go was multicultural. And this is, of course, the guy who's in charge now. He succeeded Khomeini, who overthrew the last Safavid king. And he's what's called a 12er. And he is Azeri through his father. So he himself personifies this multiculturalism that's part of Shiism. And we're back to this slide again. And the last time we looked at it, we were looking at the green side that was Sunni. Now I'm going to focus pretty much just on the red side, on Shiism. And you all will remember that Sufism overlies all of these things. It's the more mystical version of whatever. So if somebody is a Malaki Sufi, then they're basically Malaki, but they're believe more in the mystical version of it. So I want to go over this succession. And we've emphasized in our travels through world history the importance of the moments of succession when power goes from one person to another person. And, I've always been saying all along that this is America's great contribution, the passage of secular power. Monastic power is something else, and we know that succession doesn't always go smoothly. But the great riddle of civilizations and the stability of civilizations is how to make that moment when somebody dies, that power to continue. The king is dead, long live the king, as they say in Great Britain, and they do it through monarchy. All right, so Muhammad dies, and now Islam is in this moment of succession, which are always fraught. And we saw in our last election, succession was fraught as well, much to our chagrin. So Muhammad dies, his long-term right-hand man, Abu Bakr, takes over, slam dunk. Everybody knows he's the one. And he's married to, or becomes married to Muhammad's widow, Aisha. His first wife, who we remember, was this older a woman, a merchant of Mecca, who was his first convert, and is honored in Islamic tradition. She had died, but they had a daughter named Fatima or Fatima, and let's look at the other side first. Muhammad's got a brother, right? And his brother has a kid named Ali. So Ali is Muhammad's nephew, right? Now, Ali doubles his bond to Muhammad by marrying Fatima. So he's doubly bonded to Muhammad. And maybe when Abu Bakr took over, he hadn't come of age. So they decided that after Abu Bakr, that they would appoint successors. So Abu Bakr had appointed his successor, Umar. And Umar is assassinated by a Christian slave. And then the Shura, the Council of Elders, appoints the successor, Uthman. Now, Uthman is assassinated, just the problem with succession all the time, the violence around it. And everybody at this point says, it's Ali's turn. He's not only is he Muhammad's son-in-law, but he's his nephew. And so Ali is appointed. Now, this says appointed by companions, and maybe the Shura wasn't all in on that. And there is a problem, because Uthman's cousin says, wait a minute, I'm better qualified than Ali. Okay, he's related, but I'm also related to Uthman. And so we're going to get a civil war. And this is where Shiism gets started, in the civil war. Ali has a couple of kids. They're both Muhammad's grandsons. And the first one dies, and it's Hussein. So we've heard the name Hussein repeatedly. Barack Hussein Obama, Saddam Hussein, a famous person in the history of Islam. So Hussein is going to work very closely with Ali, and they're going to fight a civil war. And Ali decides that, let's get out of Medina. It's getting too hot and heavy with Uthman's cousin. So I'm going to move my capital to Iraq, Najaf. And this is Najaf. Najaf was in the news a lot when we were fighting in Iraq, but it's one of the holy sites in Shiism, because Ali chose it, that it's his capital. Why did he choose Najaf? Well, it was that area of southern Iraq has an interesting history. When Muhammad took over Medina, you'll remember that his allies had been Jews, and they supported his new religion. He was a person of the book. He was quoting the Old Testament. But when Muhammad died, the Jews no longer were favored people, and they had been exiled. And they'd been exiled to at the area around Najaf. And that had been a garrison city in one of the first external wars that Islam fought with the Byzantine Christians. So there was already a presence of from the Arab Peninsula in Iraq, and Ali moved the capital to Najaf. So Ali is buried there. He died and was succeeded eventually by Hussein. So pilgrims still take this trek and include Najaf on the itinerary, but their main stop is Karbala. And I'll tell you about that in just a second, but you can see a convenient way to take this is to go and sail into the Persian Gulf, get off in Basra and walk your way up, first to Najaf and then to Karbala. And we'll remember that the head of the Shias in Iraq has been this guy Sistani, and he is the moral leader of the Shias in Iraq, which comprise 2/3 of the population. So, and they'd always fought against Saddam or resisted, or there'd been tension with Saddam, who was from a Sunni from the north, Tikrit. But Sistani is there, and he's always called the moral shots and tried to guide Iraq through this perilous time. But these are the two holy cities in Iraq. Hussein now succeeds Ali, at least in the Shia branch. They're still fighting this civil war with Uthman's cousin. And there's a big battle in Karbala. And the location of the battle is key. Hussein is martyred in Karbala. And so the Sunnis celebrate this loss. And we've seen this in other situations in history. You'd think you'd try to forget a loss, but no, they take this martyrdom and go with it. And you probably have seen the self-flagellation of Shias, particularly in Iran, on Ashura, one of their holidays that's, I think, associated with this battle. Aiko and I just saw a celebration of that in northern India, where some of our friends were visiting. There's a Shia population there, and we saw them beating themselves with chains and wires and drawing blood. It was quite a bloody show, but it all relates to the Shia being defeated at Karbala, and he becomes a martyr and suffers. And of course, in Christianity, Jesus suffers on the cross. And we know that there are some places in Christendom that reenact the crucifixion. And in some extreme cases, drive nails through hands of volunteers who reenact the crucifixion. So it's not like no other religion does that. So this is Karbala, and this is the main mosque and compound in Karbala, and I think this is where Sistani hangs out, and the site of the pilgrim. So you saw on the earlier slide that Khomeini is a 12er. And what does 12 mean in that branch? But there's 12 divinely ordained leaders and imams that went in succession. But the last imam was this guy, Imam al-Mahdi. And the belief was that he really didn't die, that he's immortal and he lives in disguise, and that he will reappear as the promised Mahdi. And this will coincide with the second coming of a guy named Isa. Anybody know who Isa is? I'll pause a second. Dramatic pause is over. Isa is Jesus. What? Isa is Jesus. The Shia have promoted Jesus. Now, Jesus is a prophet in Islam and is celebrated with all of the other prophets. But in the 12er version of Shiism, he gets a promotion. He's going to fight he's going to return and return to life with the Mahdi. So the second coming for both the Mahdi and Jesus. And they're going to fight together against an impersonator of Jesus, a false Messiah. And so this notion that there's an antichrist is very much alive in Shiism. So as I said, like Sunnis, they believe in the biblical prophets as messengers of God, the Old Testament, and the people of the book. That includes Christians, Jews, and Muslims, all people of the book, and they all honor the prophets. Aiko and I have experienced the celebration that Muslims make of the sacrifice, not of Isaac, but the sacrifice of Ishmael, Isaac's half brother, and they believe that Ishmael was the line and accompanied Abraham to Mecca. That's part of their mythology. So it was in their belief Ishmael who was spared at the last second by God. They do not think Jesus was the Son of God, however, but they do believe that he performed all the miracles in the Gospels, but they don't believe that Jesus was crucified. So there's some limits, but basically Jesus gets a big promotion in Shiism. So by 1500, this early version of Shiism is advanced and now has real political power in the person of Ismail. And he comes down from his base in, near the Caspian Sea, and he comes down and he established his capital in Esfahan. Aiko and I have had the wonderful experience of visiting Esfahan and the architecture of Esfahan built by Ismail. I had a patient that was from Esfahan that I bonded with because he didn't know many people who'd been in Esfahan. And because of that, every time he came to see me, he bought me an envelope of saffron to give to Aiko. The interesting thing that he told me about Esfahan was that Ismail recruited the Jews. So remember, I told you that the settling of Najaf was following in the footsteps of the Jews who'd been exiled from Medina. Well, that's interesting. So with Shiism, maybe they've even had a closer relationship with Jews than the Sunni branch. And this fits. My patient told me that Jews came to this city, perhaps from Najaf, and helped set Esfahan up as a trade center. We further learned that a medical doctor that has served our family was Jewish, and his family had been from Esfahan, but they fled in Nazi times. They fled to Shanghai, where our friend actually was born. That is interesting. When we were in Tehran, we saw the synagogues, and going back a long time, we'll remember that Cyrus the Great liberated the Jews from Babylonia. So there's been this contact between Persians and Jews going back to Babylonian times, and it continued in Esfahan. So why did our friend's family flee Esfahan? Because Hitler in World War II, the Nazis are way over here. Why would Jews here be nervous? Well, when Hitler invaded Russia, one of his destinations was the oil fields of Baku, which sit right on the Caspian Sea. Oil is very rich, bubbles up to the ground. Perhaps one of the reasons why Zoroastrianism, fire in Zoroastrian figures so heavily was the plentiful supply of oil in this area. Of course, Hitler got as far as here. What's here on the Volga River? Stalingrad. And he was stopped at Stalingrad, but he was heading in the direction. He needed oil badly. And that's why Rommel had been sent across to try to take over Egypt to get closer to oil. All right. So back to the 1500s. When we were in Esfahan, it was snowing. I had to find a picture. Maybe next time I'll get the originals. When I was doing this, I didn't have access to our own photos. This will have to do for now. But winter in Esfahan was quite beautiful, quite an experience. So today, I'm just going to fast forward. And so what's Shiism today? And Shiism is in a dark green. Obviously, in Iran, Sunnis are obviously in the majority. Shiism, I think, takes over about 12% of all Islam. And just going in closer, we see, of course, there are the Shias where they originally were, where they started out in southern Iraq with Najaf and Karbala, established during the Civil War, the Great Civil War, that Ali had with the rest of the Arab Muslims that wanted to follow Uthman's cousin. So they're still there, and there's some in Afghanistan. That's interesting. Why would there be Shia in Afghanistan? And we realize, and we've lived through it, the fundamentalist takeover of Shiism with Khomeini, so much so that they decided they could no longer live with the political settlement with the Safavid Dynasty. So before then, the Shia and the Safavid Dynasty had always worked together. What was Caesar's was granted to Caesar, and what was Muhammad's was Muhammad's. But when Khomeini came to power, he was so irritated by the Shah's Western influence. He had just celebrated a huge anniversary of the establishment of Cyrus's empire with a lavish party in Persepolis. He was wholly pious. Muslims were so upset with that show of wealth, that was certainly one of the factors that led to the revolt of the fundamentalists, and the Shia fundamentalists come, and not only do they depose the Shah, but they set up a theocracy in which they're ahead. And Khomeini was the first head of state, and Khamenei, that I showed earlier, was the second. So, I mean, why is there this splotch of green in Afghanistan? That's the Hazara. And the Hazara are the Mongoloid descendants, people with Mongol blood in Afghanistan. You remember the Mongols captured Afghanistan and set up one of their sultanates in Kabul. And when you travel in Afghanistan, you can notice the distinctly Asian features of the Hazara people. And there they have to contend with the Pashtuns and the Turks, who are both Sunni. So I think some of this is to differentiate themselves from the people they perceive as maybe suppressing them, repressing them. They take on a different religion. I think the same phenomenon is in Yemen, where there's a Shia revolt against the Sunni Saudis that have always been colonizers of and occupiers of Yemen. And in a larger extent, I think some Persians have chafed under Arab rule and are use Shiism to differentiate themselves. So I think in some sense, some of this is ethnicity or religiosity. And I think in many cases, people adopt a religion just to differentiate themselves, to be able to put on a different colored jersey from their oppressors. I'm sure we'll run into other examples of this. So now there is politically, after Khomeini revolution, there is a Shia crescent. And we have to remember that the Alawites in Syria under Assad are basically a Shia sect. There are some Shias who think that their sect is so screwy that they look upon them as heretics, but politically they consider themselves part of Shiism, and Iran assists them just like they assist the Shiites in Lebanon, who may be Shiites to differentiate themselves from the Sunnis, Arabs in that area. So it extends, this crescent extends down to Bahrain, not that far from Basra, just a boat ride up to the Great Pilgrimage. So Bahrain is mostly Arab, but like the Arabs in southern Iraq, because of history, they become Shia, even though most of this Islamic world is Sunni, and most Arabs are Sunni. So the Shia crescent, this gives more numbers. Lebanon Shia 32% now. As I said earlier, they're almost 2/3 in Iraq. They're 89% in Iran itself. And in Bahrain, they're a full 65%. And here on the eastern coast of Saudi Arabia, there are a lot of enclaves that are Shia as well. And one of their leaders just was executed by the new man in charge, Prince Mohammed, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. So he's taken a tough stance on Shia preachers within Saudi Arabia, but it hands off on Bahrain, an independent territory. And this is a point of jokes and cartoons in the world, the Shia crescent. All right, so that's my introduction to how Shiism got started and how it's expanded politically in our current day world. And I thought that just is going to be useful background as we go forward and try to understand how Pashtuns fit in to this world and the world where they evolved. They evolved with a powerful Shia presence on the Western frontier beginning around 1500. And we have to know that to see how things play out. So back to Babur and the founding of the Mughals. His great victory over a Pashtun head of the fifth dynasty of the Delhi Sultanate started the beginning of the Mughal period. And as I said earlier, the irony is that his Babur's power base was Kabul. And he came down having started in the Fermana Valley, a Turkic area. And we told that story last time. So he comes down and in a big battle. He introduced field guns, so he was an innovator. He used gunpowder in warfare. Of course, Asia has known gunpowder for centuries, but never used it in war, but Babur did. Now, remember early on, the funny thing, we were talking about the early years of Pashtun civilization and what their mythology was, and their founding father, who lived at the time of Muhammad, Qais, was said to have gone to Mecca and met Muhammad. So the Pashtuns believe that they have a very early link to Islam. And then they expanded on that and said that then Qais came back and conquered Patna, which made no sense at the time. We looked at the map and we said, wait a minute. And now I did a brief look at what actually happened in Patna, and promised that I'd come back when it fit in. Well, it fits in now. Now we're at the period where we can talk about Pashtun influence in Patna. So where is Patna? Way over here, which made it impossible that Qais went over and planted Pashtun seeds in his lifetime. The kingdom that became the kingdom of Patna extended all along here. And the guy that was responsible for doing it was Sher Shah Suri. So he's a hero to the Pashtuns. We've talked about the Lodi and how they did a pretty good job with the fifth Sultanate in Delhi, but they got defeated by Babur. This guy never gets defeated. He becomes, the area is big enough to almost call it an empire. The Pashtun influence, this guy makes the Hall of Fame on this one site that stretches the notion of Pashtun influence. But he joined the Mughal army. So you have a Pashtun joining the Mughal army and became influential finally, while Babur was still alive, the governor. And he carved out an early Pashtun dynasty, explicitly a Pashtun dynasty. The Delhi Sultanate was taken over by Pashtuns, but this dynasty started by a Pashtun. Why? This guy's a hero. Now, Babur dies. His son is not very effective. His grandson, Babur's grandson, will be Akbar, and he's more effective. But into this vacuum comes Sher Shah Suri. And this praises all of his accomplishments: the Lion King, a great administrator, infrastructure, built roads, inns for travelers and caravans, so security, currency, and how did he die? Well, gunpowder was the new thing. That's how Babur won. And so I guess the Sher Shah wanted to master gunpowder, but he didn't. He died in an explosion of gunpowder. Very sad ending, but his son took over. In Patna, a beautiful mausoleum. We know that the Mughals do mausoleums well, and he dies in 1540, not 800 years before that, when the mythology said Kais was there. Known for killing a bear, a tiger with his hands, commemorated in stamps. He's the historical figure in India, even though he's Pashtun, in museums. His son took over, but when his son died, that was the end of it. And the Safavids came down and helped the Mughals recapture the throne. Why would they do that? Because they didn't want a Pashtun accumulating political power on their eastern border. So they came down and helped the Mughals put down this Pashtun upstart dynasty. And that was Akbar. He thanked the Safavids and went on to establish one of the most stable periods in Mughal rule. When he got to Patna, he was impressed because there was already industry there. Shah had created the environment for entrepreneurs, and took it over. But in the Pashtun memory, this weighs heavily. This is like the end of a Pashtun golden age abroad. They're going to have some domestic success and golden ages, but the Pashtun influence abroad reached its peak and was put down by Akbar. And in the Pashtun vocabulary, Mughal represents calamity.
It started up.
This became.
So I think you're right. I think it's loose.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Anyway, this calamity became a theme in the literature, in Pashtun literature. And the greatest writer is this guy. So the Pashtuns remember him as their Shakespeare. Pir Roshan. He was a Sufi. Okay, so we know what Sufi means. It could be anything and a Sufi. And a warrior, a poet, and he wrote in Pashto. So you remember a few sessions back, we learned that the Pashtos didn't have their own written language until 500 years ago. So he is like one of the initiators, the Chaucer of Pashto, if you will. And he was also a very smart guy, and he knew these other languages as well. And what he wanted was, okay, we just lost our Pashtun first empire in Patna, but let's tighten up Sufism, and let's set up Pashtunistan, a homeland. And so this was conceived in defeat. And we've seen that in other situations. The green sector is where Pashtuns live, and you can see that really the heart of it is Kandahar, and if it's southern central. Kabul is way up here in the north, and that means that there are other ethnicities coming in here: Uzbeks, Tajiks, and I want to introduce a couple of new players, ethnicities that are going to be important as we go forward. Here's the Punjab, and here is the Sindh. And when we look in modern day Pakistan and try to understand the politics of Pakistan, we've got to know about these ethnic groups and their relationship with the Pashtuns across this border. More desert people, not as influential politically, are the Baluks, and they're on the southern border, and we hear about them occasionally, but they don't have much political power. Okay, so he created the Pashto alphabet, derived from the Arabic script, just with 13 letters, or 13 new letters, I should say, and continues to be used this day. To this day, he writes Canterbury Tales, something like we would consider Canterbury Tales. And he inspired, obviously, many modern Pashtun writers. So what was his movement? It was called the Roshani movement. First of all, it was Republican. so there was some element of consent and deliberation. It was populist in that they wanted to help the common man. It was moderate when it came to Islam. And I think this is important for looking at Afghanistan today. If this guy's a national hero and he was a moderate Sufi style Muslim, how much sway does this kind of thinking have in Afghanistan today? There's going to be a tension between this homegrown, native, moderate Sufi style and an international import of Wahhabism. And I'm going to talk about Wahhabism coming up very, if not today, next week for sure. So, and then Pashtun nationalism, not internationalism, not Wahhabi nationalism, internationalism. There's no sense that there's a unified, that they're going to have a unified religious movement for the world globally. But he knew what the Pashtun problem was, and that's tribalism, and that's always the problem with any a new nation trying to come together out of different backgrounds. It lasted, his movement lasted 100 years under his sons and his grandsons, the Roshani movement. It was a sort of a child of the Enlightenment, rationalism, which was an international phenomena back in those days. Now, he railed against Akbar. And one of the things that he didn't like about Akbar was this new religion that Akbar was trying to start. He thought it was a personality cult, but in fact, it was more an effort at a syncretic fusion of many different elements of faith: Islam, Hinduism. Obviously, Akbar was Islam ruling a Hindu country, and so he wanted to come up with something that would satisfy the majority of his population. But there were some Catholics living in the South as well. We know that St. Thomas went to southern India. Jainism, and then finally Zoroastrianism. The Zoroastrians had fled parts of Iran with the new style Shiism. And so there are fire temples on the west coast of India. All this is reminiscent. This kind of religion is reminiscent of what some of us have noticed in Baha'ism, which is syncretic and which is prosecuted in Iran. They're seen as heretics. In Iran, they'll tolerate Jews, they'll tolerate Christians, but in Iran, they won't tolerate Sunnis and they won't tolerate Baha'i. Those are deemed as threats. So every good thing has naysayers and opponents, and so Roshan's movement provoked a mainstream backlash among conservative Pashtun Hanafi. And they're led by this guy named Darwiza, who is still quoted by conservative Pashtuns mainstream Hanafi Pashtuns. And like many of our conservative religious people, they were anti-modern, but they didn't like outside influence, the modernism that was introduced from abroad. So some of these conservatives would even tolerate the Taliban for that reason. But obviously not the Roshan Sufis, who are actually targeted by the Taliban. So that gets me back to our main diagram of the different religions. I'll just summarize what we've covered. Here are the Shia, and you remember Khomeini and Khamenei are Twelvers. We explained what Twelvers are. We explained what the Alawites are, the Syrian version that some people consider to be heretical. There's other versions of Ismaili, but you see the Twelvers are the majority. And the 15-20% of the people of Muslims in the world are Shia, and we saw how they were distributed. We were just talking about the conservative Hanafis. We've been talking about the Sufis and how they overlay everything. So Roshan was a Hanafi, but his version of Hanafi was heavily mystical and Sufi. And of course, one of the best Sufi writers, I think all of us have read him at one time or another, is Rumi. Next week, we'll get to Hanbali, very different than Hanafi. And I think what I've said is that the Hanbali are the originalists. So they're more like the Catholics, you know, very, very loose analogy. But Hanbali are more conservative, and where are they centered? They're centered in the home of Islam in Saudi Arabia, who controls Mecca. And next time, we're going to talk about how the Hanbali, more conservative people were supercharged by this guy, Wahhab, and also by similarly minded originalist, fundamentalist, like the Salafists. There's subtle difference between these two, which we'll get into next week. And you see from a branch here, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. These folks have an ideology, and here's where it fits in. Just coming back to Hanafi, the Taliban have an ideology. And where does it fit in? It fits in here, but as an off branch of Deobandi. Deobandi, what's that? So this is where I'm going to stop. Tune in next week and find out what Deobandi is, and I'll take any questions people may have.
That was good.
Interesting. Yeah.
I am so looking forward to actually getting to concentrate and watch the whole thing. This is exactly what I've been confused about with all of the stuff that's going on with Iran
Mhm.
and the Pashtuns, and this is so timely, John. Thank you.
Well, it's good for me because I found all this confusing, and to have an incentive to figure it out, and so as to be able to share it with other people fits me too. So I learned as much as you do.
Very complicated. You put it together very nicely, John. I'm impressed.
Thank you. Thank you. So if there's no other content related questions, I'll stop the tape and we can socialize.